All right, welcome everybody. This is the Reps Call. We are here today. I'm going to say hello to the people who are in the Zoom room. Hello, Francesca, Andy, Wim, Paul, Kathleen is our best special guest, Takeshi, Timi, Yuli, Liv, Leia, Harcio, Rao, and Sarwar. I also see Fernando and Cairo, and somebody wrote things. I don't know what that is. On the Etherpad, welcome everyone. Today we have a rather different theme to talk about, a different topic. Kathleen from lovely Berlin, she is in the same city with me, will speak about Mozilla sustainability program and how Mozilla cares about the environment. So Kathleen, the floor is yours, and then I will give some minutes to people to ask questions.
Cool. Thank you so much. Lovely to be with you all. And I'm really looking forward to the questions. So I'll try to keep it short. I'm going to start with a brief overview of where we are with the sustainability program so far, then talk about our first greenhouse gas emissions assessment, just so we have an idea of scale, and then look at our plans for 2021. In terms of where are we? It's actually a new program. We only launched in March 2020. But even before that, as many of you probably know, we've had resource groups and a lot of employees that cared about the environment, and the conversation has been ongoing for years. And we basically just took opportunity of the Fridays for Futures movement and more attention being drawn to sustainability to finally step up our game and launch a formal program to do so. And as I took that job, we set out with 3 strategic goals to focus our attention, and because we needed to figure out how to do our homework first. So the first goal is we're reducing the emissions as much as we can, and we will mitigate what we can't yet avoid. I'll talk more about that when we talk about the assessment. We wanted to train and develop our staff because it's very clear that this is not something that can be driven from the top down, but everyone needs to have an understanding of what sustainability means in order to be able to actually build an organizational culture that thinks in a sustainable way. And then raising awareness, and that goes both internally as well as externally. For those interested, we have MozFest coming up in March, and we actually have a sustainability track there also for the very first time. So you actually still have 3 more days to register for early bird tickets. So do register and join us in the track and help us promote and draw attention to sustainability there too. What we've done also in the last year, we actually onboarded a first cohort of what we call environmental champions in June. And a second one in November. So we're at 25 people now who spend between 5 and 10 hours every month on sustainability in their respective teams, which also, I'm going to come back to that in the 2021 planning, but building that up in how to scale that properly is one of the questions I'm grappling with for how to do it well. And I have a feeling this community can help me with how to think about that structure. In terms of greenhouse gas assessment, we did our baseline for 2019 because that's the last full year that we had to account for as we did that assessment. And we published the report in November. All our methodology, all the data that we used is public except for the sensitive stuff. We had roughly 60 data owners within Mozilla that had pieces of information that we needed in order to make those calculations. So it's been quite the wrangling process to get there. We ended up with what we call business services and operations at 14,222 metric tons. And I know it's really difficult to imagine what that really means, but to give you an example, if we break this down per person, those emissions, that's about 12 metric tons per person. My personal carbon footprint for the year is at 3.5. So Mozilla more than triples, if not quadruples, my personal impact because of the way we're set up. So there's plenty of room to improve, and that's what we're going to work on going forward. I will also mention that the use of our products, because Firefox, Pocket, we looked at hubs, we looked at mobile, millions of users, it's a significant impact. We don't yet know how to actually measure that. So what we measure is how long people are online when they use our products. We use the electricity for whatever device they need in order to be on our products. We can't differentiate what Firefox is, what YouTube does, what Facebook does. We don't know that. We just know people are online, and that's what we measure. And that's at roughly 780,000 metric tons. So significant. If you look at what the internet's impact is, there's a lot we can learn and understand for how to do better. Plans for 2021, just very briefly, we just announced our climate commitments with support from the entire leadership, both foundation and corporation, a couple of weeks ago. We are already carbon neutral, and we're intent on keeping it that way. Part of the condition in order to stay carbon neutral is that we reduce our emissions. So significant reductions, ideally exceeding the commitments of the Paris Climate Agreement is going to be part of that, because we know that the Paris Climate Agreement is actually not ambitious enough if we listen to the science. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. We want to lead openly, because one of the things that I and team learned is it's incredibly hard and difficult to do this, way more than we anticipated when we got into this, which is also why it took us longer to publish some of our results. But there is very little open source or even accessible emission factors to do calculations out there. So we want to share as much as possible of what we learned, including all the templates we worked with and whatever other best practices we develop as we go forward to help others move along, because it's way more complicated than it should be. And then the fourth one is product and design explorations. What are things we could do in order to also address this big chunk of 98% of our emissions that's related to product use? Is there a way for us to increase performance? Are there design principles we can follow? Can we draw attention to that? All of that is an exploration, because there's no guidelines for how to do that well yet. And yeah, we're planning to release the next report actually at the end of June already this year, where we have a head start on collecting our data for 2020. So we're hoping to get there. And then we're going to build a more visible platforms for our champions to help bring the implementation plan to light. And I've left the biggest chunk of work to the end, because that's the part where I have a lot of questions still and we don't have the answers, but obviously specific reduction targets for every single team and implementation plans is going to take a lot of work. And we're setting up workshops, facilitating that with every department within Mozilla, to see how to best align their priorities with those reduction targets. And there's going to be a lot of creativity in making that happen, but we're following the science-based target initiatives to align our goals for that. And that's the focus of the work for the first half of the year. And I'm going to pause there for questions.
Cool. Thank you very much, Kathleen. I'm going to also say hello to Angel, Gabriela, Yuli, and Melinda that just joined the call. And I'm going to ask the room, do you have any questions you would like to voice, or I can be your voice as well?
There are a couple of questions on the Etherpad, but okay.
Go ahead, Paul. Let's go with Paul, and then we can go to the Etherpad.
Yeah, hi, Kathleen. Just a couple of questions. The first one is will some of the learns or any of the sort of the process changes, any of the changes to way of doing things, will any of that be sort of passed out to the community? Because obviously we're a constituency of people who also can have an impact, although we may not necessarily be involved in the MOCO or MOFO calculation. We've got the opportunity to potentially make some impact ourselves.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I have a feeling it's going to depend per org on when we do it. So my idea for how I go into those workshops for figuring out what our targets is that we discuss that with each org, we set the targets and we publish the targets. So that as we work on implementation goals, everyone, including the community, already knows what the target is. So we can all figure out how to best work and align our individual teams or individual objectives to go there. But how much community involvement in order to getting there will depend on which part of the reduction each team tackles, right? So I'm guessing that when we talk performance for Firefox, we can publish what metabug we're working on, or if there's a best practice or a research study or whatever that we can talk about and we can loop others in. I have a feeling when it comes to supply chain management, like who are our vendors and how we're engaging with them, it's going to be harder to publish that early on, because those are often confidential and sensitive. So I think it's going to depend on that. But my plan definitely is I don't just want to have implementation plans internally. I definitely want to publish those targets, because it's also a matter of keeping us to account. So that's the assumption with which I go in. We publish each target and then we figure out the implementation plan as much as possible with external partners also.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, could this, I appreciate the aim is to keep Mozilla, Mofo, carbon neutral or better, obviously, ideally. Could this also lead to sort of green or environmental changes in our products? You know, better use of power saving facilities, for example, or better brightness in applications. That you know, filter it down to a product level.
Yeah, that's part of the fourth commitment is around exploration when it comes to design and product. I will say that this is a long-term thing, because what I've learned from best practices in the industry so far, it is really difficult to do that well. And there's a lot of discussion still on what actually a best practice is to even measure what's good for the environment, what isn't. So I'm not going to be the one telling the product teams how to do it, but we will definitely explore how to do it better and whether there's ways to innovate under that notion also. I'll just say that the time horizon is probably something like the next 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 years if we're unlucky. I'm looking at 3 to 5, but that is probably the time span we're looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions in the room?
I have a question. Well, so it is considered as our like planning period, or do we have already something to do?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got the question.
Okay, so is this the just now? Is this considered as a planning period, or some discussing to make a plan, or do we already have something to do now?
We don't have an implementation plan yet. We know where we need to go, but I'm not in a position to say this is exactly the plan of what we're doing yet.
Thank you.
Sure. There was another question from someone in the room.
Yes, there was somebody else as well. Sarwar, was that you?
Yes, I have a question. Basically, when we will get the details of this program about sustainability, especially I'm very interested about this sustainability what. That's why I want to know in detail. So from where can I get in details of this program for Mozilla, especially of Mozilla?
Right. A question there is, what sort of detail are you looking for? We publish everything that we've done so far, and that we can work on more detailed on the wiki, as well as on the Mozilla blog. But if you want to go into an actual implementation plan, like this is the quarterly goal, I don't have that yet, because that is the work we are going to do throughout the first half of this year. But everything that's already in the works where everyone can get involved in, whether that is MozFest or some of the other projects that are launched, and some of the champions have launched projects also, all of that is on the wiki. So that is public. And if somebody can share the link in the Etherpad, I'm not in the Etherpad right now, but I think Francesca, you probably have it handy. Do go in there. And we're also inviting the conversation on matrix, because right now the team is really small. So when there's ideas and pushes from the outside, we do our best to integrate that. But right now I don't have a super detailed project management plan yet.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions in the room? Or should I go to the Etherpad? All right, we have some questions coming on the Etherpad. Kathleen, I will be the voice of the question. The first one, I think you kind of replied to it. How can we calculate our own emissions? You said that they're not really good open source tools, something around that.
Well, for the individual carbon footprint, there are a few. I can share, Francesca, Konstantina, one of you, I can share some calculators that I've used, for instance, to do mine. Those are estimates. They don't go into as much detail as we go at an organizational level in order to be able to really target the initiatives. But there is ways to have annual assumptions for your personal footprint with ideas for how to reduce it that are open sourced, but they are for individual use only.
Good. Feel free to send to either of us, and we will add it on the Etherpad for future reference. Another question that came in is, was there something that particularly surprised you when you were researching how to calculate emissions?
How hard it is. Because like I had done my individual footprint before, so seeing how, like, the fact that we had 60 data owners within Mozilla, I think we started when we mapped it with 10, and then one person was saying, but I don't have access to this, and you also need to look at this, and it just kept spreading. So at some point we had this whole list of stakeholders in our that people that had information. It was really surprising, and it also told us a lot about how we have to streamline some of the information flows internally in order to make that easier. And then I think when the numbers came back and I got the impact of our products, I sat back and really asked whether they had, like, whether the numbers were right or whether there was a comma missing somewhere. Because it's like, this is like, seriously, it's huge. But now, having read like all of the other reports, as far as they're public, most other companies don't publish their numbers. They just share their commitments, but not what's actually underlying them. And have done more calculations on it. It's actually not as bad as online advertising or online streaming. Like, if you look at particular services and read through the research, it's even worse. But the internet's impact overall is more significant than I had realized. And I'm still mentally processing what that actually means.
Cool. And actually, a relevant question to follow up on that. Someone asks, we want to grow Firefox usage, measured in online time, usage days, or whatever. Want not necessarily increase the footprint the way we calculate this. If people just close Firefox instead of letting it sit idle, but the computer is still running, that would decrease both those numbers. But is that really what we want?
No, and the way we're thinking about this, that like we have a table, which unfortunately I'm currently not able to put online yet because the data is quite complex, but we are planning for growth in Firefox, and necessarily that's going to bring up that number. Hopefully, though, as we look at performance and as we look at measures for how we can, for instance, collaborate with other organizations to increase the amount of renewable electricity that's available, that's not going to be a linear growth in terms of emissions, but we're trying to slow the growth of emissions as we understand what the impact of our products is. So that's always going to be a question for how to go about it. And it's the part that's the hardest to control, because obviously we want to grow, but for the when we say we're carbon neutral, we're looking at business services and operations. It does include all scopes except for the use of products, because that's the one where we can't differentiate that yet. And that's the one we can control for how to reduce. So for use of products, we are planning for growth, and then we're looking at how to best align with other industry players, with other, like, also engaging in policy conversations, raising awareness for how we can make sure that that growth isn't linear in terms of emissions.
Cool. Also related to question, we do run a huge number of tests on every code change on cloud machines, and that was generally seen as a good and necessary. Do we need to cut into that for climate reasons?
That's a conversation that's very heated amongst engineers right now, because yes, testing obviously also has an impact on that. At the same time, we also want to make sure our products work the way they need to. So there's a lot of conversation that goes into that. I think my point as a sustainability steward is primarily know that it has an impact, and ask whether are there ways for us to run some tests, for instance, in peak hours when there's solar energy available, depending on the region we are. Is there ways for us to do it in off-peak hours when it's not as expensive? Like, can we think about some tests as less time critical? I think those are just ways of how we can start incorporating the question that can we do the way we design and develop our products in a more sustainable mindset. And I'm also looking at engineers to help us figure out how to best do that.
Cool. Well, there are no other questions on the Etherpad. I'm wondering if anybody has any question that popped up as Kathleen was speaking. Somebody says, great efforts by Mozilla, so proud. So we have proud volunteers here.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I just added one calculator that Kathleen sent me and a couple of links to blog posts and to the wiki. I hope those are the right links, so you can start have a look there if you want to dive more in depth.
Cool. Thank you,
Cool.
Francesca. All right, since we don't have any other questions, I would like to thank very much Kathleen for being here today with us. You are welcome to come whenever you want, and also you are welcome to give us more updates. I think that's an issue and theme that the volunteers do care about. So thank you very much, Kathleen. Thank you everyone for participating today in this rep school, and I will see you all next week. Have a great day. Keep
Thank
washing your
you.
hands.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.